All right, guys. We'll technical difficulties. We'll get rocking. We'll get set. That's how I'm doing. We made it. How are you doing, guys? Good. Good evening. For all of you that don't know my name's Dr. Welcome for us today. TruRoots Health Center, we specialize in specific and neurologically based care for families. So today, though, we're going to dive deep. This year, we've been very passionate. We are extremely passionate about education because knowledge is power, and we all need a little bit of help from our friends sometimes in order to move the ball down the field and help our families, help ourselves get well. And there's just so much conflicting information and a lot of knowledge out there to be gained. So that's the whole goal and purpose of this seminar series. So this year we're doing a seminar series called the Be Hard to Kill series. Month 1 was on longevity and cardiovascular system. Month 2 was on genetics and epigenetics, and you'll get a little peek behind the curtain on that tonight because it applies very well to this population. And today we can talk about neurodevelopmental delays in the process of neurodevelopment and why it's potentially going so askew for so many of us. So cool? Yeah, cool. And my hope and goal, guys, is to ultimately give you tangible, actionable steps in order to start to move the health of yourself and your family in the direction that you want. Okay? So cool testimony from the office. I haven't seen this family in a long time. But Michael originally came to our office struggling. He really would only communicate with his mom, not really with his dad, not his grandparents, not his aunts, uncles, really nobody beside his mom. And even that was extremely limited in broad verbal applications. Like his language is extremely limited. He also had extreme hydrophobia to the point where bath time was a physical fight or altercation. I'm not sure if any of you guys can feel that. But after pursuing care with us, after a few months, really, he started to do some pretty amazing things. His mom was a local business owner, and she would market at various markets around the community and set up a tent and sell directly to consumer. And so there was a lot of social engagement. By the time we were done with this care, Michael was actually one of her salespeople. He would go to events with her and start to hand out things to people in the public and communicate. And he got to the point in time where he was actually bathing himself. That time's no longer a physical altercation. All that excessive stimuli that he was really struggling with calmed way, way, way down. And they actually sold everything, moved to Florida, and now live on a boat. So hydrophobic to full-time sailing. So just really cool to see what the power of his body was able to do. So my first specialty, guys, is in pediatric neurodevelopment perinatal care. So I do really have a heart and passion for caring for little people. So a lot of the information that you'll learn tonight too is not from my brain. It's from the work of much smarter and wonderful doctors and physicians and research. And ultimately I get to just deliver the information to you. Okay. So my original focus in care was on pediatric and family health and development. As a result of caring very well for those families, they started to bring their moms, dads, grandmas, and grandpas to us that had much more complex issues. And so we had to get a whole lot better at figuring out spinal correction, actually how to change the structure of the column. And now we're one of 3 offices in the state that provides this level of clinical care. So whether we just need the brain to grow the right way or whether we need the spine that's broken down to be rebuilt, that is what our job here is in the practice. So our true focus in this practice is on something called salutogenesis, meaning origins of health. So show of hands, who here believes your body is a self-adapting and self-healing organism? Yeah, right? We all get cut, scrapes, and bruises, broken bones. On average, all of us have roughly 10,000 cancer cells inside of our body at any moment in time. The body is finding it, tagging it, recycling it, repairing itself. So why in the neurodevelopmental population are their bodies struggling so hard? And that's what we're going to dive into tonight. Okay? Another cool testimony from the office. Sydney, 9-year-old. This kid just had a bad day car accident. Autism, pandas, Down syndrome. Did you guys just see today that the Lucas Law got passed? So they're finally recognizing pandas as a neurodevelopmental issue, and it literally just got passed today. So I literally messaged lady. I was like, "Whatever you did, congratulations! Would love to connect with you." Sydney he was a really, really severe case. However, upon pursuing care in our office, one day he was really struggling. But after getting adjusted, going into the car, turning some music on, he was just a happy camper. So a significant upregulation in mood and physical and mental, emotional well-being upon pursuing care. Okay? So again, if you guys like reading, if you like resources, research, literature, books, a couple of my favorites up here we'll get a lot of good information from. Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Deutsch, and then Disconnected Kids by Dr. Robert Melillo. If you need more additional resources, or one of the coolest books that I think applies very well to the population is called The Polyvagal Theory. But it's a little, but it's still really cool. And then if you guys need like a roadmap on how to help your children, a really good book is called Symphony of Reflexes. And it helps you to understand the integration of primitive reflexes and how there are certain things that are supposed to happen at certain times in the body in order to help the brain grow and develop and get past the next stage of maturity. And so we'll dive into primitive reflexes tonight as well. But if you guys need additional resources or you're a learner like I am, I'm happy to send you all the stuff that I'm looking into as well. Okay? So then we're going to talk about what's going on, why, and what's next. So guys, how do statistics look on neurodevelopment in our country?
Not great.
Not great. Are we moving in the right direction or the wrong direction? Wrong direction, yep. Why do you think that is?
There's a lot of different data.
There's actually 3 prevailing arguments right now for the case on neurodevelopment. One is we're getting better at diagnosing it. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But it can't explain the meteoric rise, right? The exponential increase that does not correlate, right? The other prevailing argument is genetics, right? Which, yes, in some cases there is a genetic component, but roughly 95% of disease burden in America at this time, it depends upon what research study you reference, is related to lifestyle and epigenetics, where 5% is genetically related. So do genetics play a role? Yeah, it kind of potentially gives you a loaded gun. But the lifestyle choices you make then influence whether the trigger gets pulled or not. And that's called epigenetics. And we're going to learn a little bit more about that tonight. Okay? So there is a massive rise. And in 2014, it was projected to be 1 in 68. Now, just yesterday, I heard that it's projected to be 1 in 31 children are impacted with autism. And that rate has, just blown up in the last 20, 30 years. So we're going to talk about the potential rationale behind why. Unfortunately, 7.1 million kiddos are dealing with some pretty severe anxiety. And if you compress that data, it should be right here. Oh, where it went. If you compress that data to just look at 13 to 18-year-olds, that's 1 in 3. So 1 in 3 teenagers are having a really hard time adapting to their world, adapting to their environment. We need to figure out why. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay, so 1 in 8 or 9 million children have an anxiety disorder, 1 in 3 teens. But the really concerning statistic, guys, is that more than 50% of our children are chronically ill, because this statistic does not factor in 2 other chronic conditions, which would push the statistic up to 54%. But 32 million children have 1 of 20 chronic health conditions. So yes, we're seeing a rise in autisms and neurodevelopment issues, but we're also just seeing a rise in disease and illness. And the same illnesses that are impacting us as adults and geriatrics are impacting the pediatric population. It's just the timeline in which it's showing up is compressing. So again, there has to be a reason for it. And so the more information that we have, the better choices we can start to make and the better trajectory we can put our little people on. Okay? So guys, health can get really complicated, especially when we dive into this umbrella of alphabet soup. Because how many different diagnoses are there under the neurodevelopmental paradigm?
A lot.
A lot. Hundreds to thousands. Yeah. So sometimes we make the mistake of, okay, now you have this one very specific diagnosis, and here are your medicated treatment options, right? But if we all are in agreement that the body's a self-adapting, self-healing organism, why don't we look upstream and see what do we know to be true that will improve health no matter what condition we're looking at? Is that an okay way to think about the problem? Cool. So when we take health, we can get super, super complicated because we have specialists for everything in America. We have nose doctors, toes doctors, ears doctors, and they know everything there is to know about that individual part. But does the finger work independent of the forearm? No. Does the heart work independent of the brain? No. So sometimes you need to take a little bit more of like a 30,000 foot view, macroscopic foot view, and be like, okay, if that part of you is not working, what's upstream that influences the mechanism of that tissue? Like thyroid is a really good way to look at this because the thyroid's dependent upon thyroid stimulating hormone, which comes from your pituitary gland. And what influences your pituitary gland? Your hypothalamus. And what influences your hypothalamus? Everything. So when you start to look upstream, you get a broader perspective of, okay, what choices can I make to make a difference? Right? So we all drove one of these things to be here tonight. Unless you guys got a Tesla. So what does a car need to move from point A to point B? Yes. Love it. Cool. So it needs some power. But if you got just a tank of gas sitting there, is it going to go from A to B? No. What else does it need? Right. System. Love that. So we're talking about mechanics as well as electrical circuits and parts. So if we have a fully formed car with a full tank of gas, will it get from point A to point B, or does it need one more thing? It needs it needs something inputting command to organize the power and the parts together to get to do what we want it to do, right? And so same thing with this cool thing that we all get to hang out with in our pocket nowadays. What do computers need to work? Parts, power, and somebody inputting command, driving information to organize the parts and the power together for coordinated action so it does what it needs to do. And then what about this cool vehicle we get to drive around in every day? What does this thing need to work? Power, information. Part, power, information. Cool. So, anatomy 101, we all know our parts, right? Heart, lungs, liver, tissue, kidneys. What is the information in the body?
Anything that's inputted.
Like that.
Be thoughts, it can be food, it can be oxygen.
Decent answer. Yeah. So parts and power. Information is typically the vibratory frequency that's traveling over neural tissue. Okay. So information in the body is coordinated via chemistry. So based on nutrition and what we eat, but it's also coordinated via information, right? All your neural tissue, guys. Any musicians in there? Cool. Anybody know how to tune a guitar or a bass? Yeah. So if you put tension on a string, you pluck the string, it vibrates at a specific wave, and then that creates a pitch or a sound. Your neural tissue works pretty much the same way. The amount of tension applied to neural tissue affects the resonant wave of the tissue, which then affects electricity moving through the body. So if we distort or influence the amount of tension on neural tissue, we influence the waveform of the tissue, and then that either speeds up or slows down information. There's a cool Chinese physiologist that published a cool study that shows that the amount of weight equivalent to the amount of tension equivalent to the weight of a dime can either speed up or slow down neural impulses upwards of 60%. So the information traveling over that neural tissue, the speed and the accuracy of that communication is ultimately going to influence the organization at the level of the cell. Does this make sense to you guys? Because you're made up of cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. Organs make up systems. Systems make up you, right? So this thing needs the same thing all those other things need. Parts, power, information. Now we got a lot of doctors in the world looking at different parts, right? Luckily, due to public demand and due to just advancing research, we have a lot more doctors, like biomedical doctors, functional nutritionists, focused on the power supply, the chemistry, the food going into the body. Would you guys agree that the food you eat influences your health and your well-being? So, cool. If you do not agree with that, I encourage you to eat a full carrot cake every day for a year and see what happens. So power dramatically influences the biochemistry, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth, something called methylation and histone methylation, which influences epigenetic expression. Information, though. Information is typically looked at and assessed by, and you may be sitting in their office right now. So we look at the functional application of how that information is traveling over the system. Neurologists just do a great job of evaluating pathology of the tissue, but maybe not looking at it from a functional application. Okay. So because systems are unfortunately all made up of parts, they're all designed to do what eventually?
Correcting.
Yeah, sorry. We're not going to go into Jesus, right? So parts do eventually break down, but what accelerates breakdown? So what happens if we take this cool little plant, let's call it a peach tree, because peaches are awesome. What if we take this peach tree and we put it in an environment where the soil was polluted, but we expect it to bear fruit? Will it do what it was designed to do? No. What if we put it in a shaded environment and don't get enough sun exposure? Will it do what it was designed to do? Yeah. Even though the same genetic structure is there, if we influence the stress being applied to this organism, you're going to influence its expression, even though at a genetic level, it has all the pieces to do what it's supposed to do. Does that make sense to you guys? Cool. So if we want this peach tree to bear fruit, we have to put it in an environment where it does its job well. And the same is true of this system. When the body starts to express symptoms, are symptoms good or bad? Kind of a good question. It's like either, right? Symptoms are just information about, real-time intelligent feedback helping you to understand how's everything going, right? However, symptoms are typically the last thing to show up in a disease process and typically the first thing to go away. You guys are all, if you are a patient here, you should know this information. Your nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, your nerve roots, what does it control? One word answer.
Impulses.
Yeah. What does it control inside your body? Oh, great answer. Nice. It does. It controls everything. You're right. So, so the crazy part is if you take the entirety of the nervous system and you kind of break it into like a Venn diagram, 80% of neural tissue is not within your conscious control, and nor do you feel it. Like right now, your heart is beating, and your lungs are breathing, your food's digesting, and white blood cells and red blood cells, and pancreas and liver and enzymes, and all this cool stuff's happening for you. And you're not consciously aware of it, nor are you controlling it, correct? Mm-hmm. Cool. So that's called autonomic function. Right now, all of us are resisting gravity. That's a complicated neurologic process. That's why the majority of the animals in the world walk on 4 legs and not on 2 legs, right? So motor function is also primarily an involuntary mechanism. You're not consciously aware of you sitting upright and resisting gravity, right? So 80% of your neurology, you're not aware of, it's just working for you and keeping you alive and healthy. 20% of neurology is for sensory tissue, okay? Well, we can vibration, temperature, 2-point discrimination, all these different receptors in your tissue that send different data to the brain. Out of all that neural tissue, only about 5% of it is for pain fibers. So a big mistake that we make in our society is that we base 100% of our healthcare decisions on like 5% of the working data. Okay, so most of us are waiting for symptoms to show up before we do anything about a problem, and that's putting us really, really late in the game. Especially if you agree that your body's a self-adapting, self-healing organism. It's been fighting a good fight for a long time, and now symptoms are starting to show up, and it's going to happen all the time. Okay. But symptoms are really just an intelligent feedback mechanism letting you know, like, hey, man, I've been working on this problem for a while, but I need some help now, okay? So it's a really nice cause and effect relationship based upon what sort of power is going into the body and what sort of information is traveling over the system. Because everything in the body runs on power and chemistry. They're really the 2 leading systems of the body, the nervous system and the digestive system. And if we can influence those 2 systems and give the body the right cues and the right power supply, it does a really cool job of taking great care of itself. So we're going to transition this conversation to epigenetics and how does it work. Is everybody familiar with this term, epigenetics? Yeah? Yeah, cool. So basically it means like everything that happens in life outside of your DNA, okay? So mom and dad come together, make a baby, and you get half from mom, half from dad, roughly, right? Doesn't exactly, but roughly. So you have this underlying genetic code. So a good example of this is like your BRCA gene. Women have what's called a BRCA1 and BRCA2 gene. One is a tumor suppressive gene. Okay? However, if this gene gets methylated, which basically means a certain chemical structure gets bound to it, it suppresses, it turns off that expression of that gene. meaning that gene, if it's working well, is going to reduce your incidence of breast cancer by about 50%. However, if we methylate it, basically if we turn the light switch off to that gene, then your incidence of breast cancer goes up by about 50%. Okay, so there is a genetic component to some of the neurodevelopmental stuff that we're seeing. But the majority of your methylation and what's called histone modification, again, what's happening way, way, way down at the cellular DNA level, is epigenetically influenced, meaning coming from the environment. So like certain things that cause methylation. Have you guys heard of something called BPA? Yeah, it's like the stuff that leaches off plastic, or leaches out of like the aluminum cans. So literally everything on a shelf in an aluminum can is leaching BPA. Okay. Same thing with like glyphosate, which I'm kind of blown away that I've been driving up and down 70 and been seeing advertising for glyphosate, like, hey, glyphosate, we need to get behind this. I'm like, wasn't there just a massive class action lawsuit on how this causes lymphoma? It's like, yeah. So there's a lot of environmental cues, a lot of environmental toxins and stressors that will bind, shut off, or turn on certain genes that you don't want turned on. And this is happening at large scale. Depends on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. And you start to look at agricultural practices and messing with the weather and what's in our soil and what's in the water and all these chemicals. And when you say this, and people are like we all know, right? We all know what's happening in some scale, just whether, how much you know of this. But ultimately, this is all influencing the expression of our genes. And so really cool ways that you can influence the epigenetic factors are through various lifestyle factors. And if you influence your lifestyle with positive health practices like eating the way you're supposed to, moving your body, reducing stress, you can alter gene expression. And so, it doesn't really matter what the disease process is. If you start to change the variables that have influenced you at a genetic level, at the level of the DNA, you can start to change the expression of that over time. Okay. So, I've covered all this. We're going to go through it. Any questions on DNA methylation or histone modification? Those are big fancy terms. Basically, it means things are turning on and off certain genes, and if that happens, you're in worse health than you want. Okay, but this is applied very specifically to our pediatric population because if you have read the study, they have recently identified 221 carcinogenic chemicals in fetal cord blood. So, as DNA is forming and the development of the infant is occurring, it's already starting to modify expression of that human. Okay, so this is where if we can start to get access and we can start to teach people prior to conception of like, hey, I know you want to get married and have babies. You're 15, and this is something you want to do in the next 10 to 15 years. I'm glad I got that right. Then we start to make some tweaks and changes now. But man, how hard is it to influence the health of a teenager? Like, man, I just want my independence. I want to do what I want to do. Mom, dad, and tell me what to do for the last 15 years. I'm free, baby. Like, let's rock. It's like, but if we can start to model some of these behaviors for them, it's going to help them to start to change the trajectory of what we're seeing in infancy. And then that's really the best place to start with health is when we're as young as possible. So this is adopted from Dr. Paul Hardy, who's a biomedical doctor out on the West Coast. If you don't follow his work, I encourage you to. Same thing with, it'll come back. Dr. Paul Hardy does a really good follow. Neurodevelopmental quadrangle. This is a great way to think about this problem. There are a few primary systems in the body that are involved in this process. And if we can influence them, if we can improve the health and the performance of these systems, we can start to get a better expression of the human in front of us. So we have our environment, guys. Our environment, like we agreed upon, kind of stressful. More chemical load. Is an organic apple today the nutritional equivalent of an organic apple 30 years ago? No, right? We all know this information. So that's where all our power is supposed to be coming from and where we're getting the right things in order to express the right DNA. So our environment, yes. More toxic now? Yes. Yep. Cool. And then let's say we have somebody that does have a genetic expression that may have a harder time adapting to this environment. They may have a harder time with methylation. Have you guys ever heard of like the MTHFR gene mutation? Yeah, it's a methylation issue. Right? Yeah. So let's say we take a little person who's going to have a harder time detoxifying in the world and we put them in a more toxic environment. Their system is going to fail faster over their life cycle. So we pair this environmental load with toxins with general malnourishment because, you know, if we look at fetal cord blood samples, what's in breast milk, ideally should be an amazing thing for our humans, but you know, there's some variability there. And then if we look at like formulas or baby food, everybody's seen the highest levels of glyphosate in baby food. Do you know which baby food it is? And then those little pink puffs, the little rice puffs that like are super popular, crazy chemically toxic. And there's all these really cool apps nowadays where you can scan barcodes and you can see like what the toxic load is in the different foods that we're giving kids. But man, the amount of stuff that's marketed to children that has like bunnies and rainbows and it's all artificial dye that wrecks their system is insane. So we have all these environmental loads, and then we have somebody with a genetic expression and they have a little bit of a harder time and their system's just fail faster. It's going to express disease. Okay? However, we have the nervous system, digestive system, detox, and immune systems. Do you see how all the arrows in this quadrangle are two ways? Because each system influences the other. They don't work independent of each other. So we take somebody that has a harder time in this world, we increase the toxic load of the environment, and maybe this system isn't working the way that it's supposed to. Eventually, we'll get a crappy expression of health, and it gets various diagnoses based upon the age they're diagnosed and what symptoms they're presenting with. Agreed? Cool. So rather than focusing down here on this end of the spectrum, what if we focused on, okay, what can I do? What sort of practices can I put in place to improve the adaptability and communication of my nervous system to help my digestive system provide better nutrition to my body? And what if we start to down-regulate environmental load? What's going to happen to the child or to the person? They're going to be better. Okay, how much better?
You sound regulating environmental load.
You can start making better consumer choices, right? But not 100%, right? You can't control everything. So the things that you can control need to take a higher precedence. So this is what's happening to all of us on various scales, and we get various diagnoses based upon what tissue is being involved. Okay? Genetic predisposition or environmentally induced, and up for argument, but current research says 95%, 5%, will cause something called microbiome distortion, dysbiosis, or depletion. Has anybody heard of a microbiome before? Cool. What is it?
No idea.
I love your honesty. Thank you. Your microbiome is the makeup of the bacteria that live on in you. Okay. If you kind of morbid, if you took me and like threw me in a wood chipper and caught all of it and looked at it under a microscope, 9/10 of the material that you would see would be bacteria, viruses, other things living in and on my body. 1/10 would be my human DNA. So you're outnumbered in and on your own body, 9-10-1. Okay? So do you think these bacteria play a role in the expression of your health and your well-being? Yep, they influence cellular signaling. They influence all sorts of cool stuff chemically at a very, very, very small level. But because they're so massive in scope, they influence everything. The most dense collection of bacteria that live in and on your body are located where? In your gut, specifically in the small intestines. Okay. Do you know where roughly 90% of serotonin is made in the body? Well, first, do you know what serotonin is? It's a hormone neurotransmitter, and it makes us feel happy and well regulated. Do you know where 90% is created? 10% is made in the brain by the dorsal raphe nucleus. And they've done all sorts of cool animal studies where they damaged that part of the brain, cut it out, put lesions in it, injected it with cancer, and zero impact in animal studies on behavior issues. But then if you sever the vagus nerve, which is the nerve that connects the brain to the gut outside of the spinal cord, or if you cause abnormal bacterial populations in the stomach and small intestines, guess what happens in animal studies? They go mad. They have a really hard time. They're super dysregulated and they don't follow normal social cues, behavior, and development. So the microbiome is super, super important. It's responsible for psycho, neuro, and immune modulation. Psycho, mental, emotional, neuro, nervous system, immune, how the body interacts with pathogens in the world, right? So the microbiome is really the leading metric on how those three systems, or how those three systems can be influenced, right? Where do we get our microbiome from, guys? Where do we get typically our first bacterial exposure? Say it loud if the people in the back. Oh yeah, birth, being born. and typically being born vaginally. Which is why when we see increased cesarean rates, and there's some interesting literature showing that about 8 to 11% of births require or need to be influenced to be a cesarean, but cesarean rates in certain parts of our country are 30, 40, 50%. And so if mom is not passing a healthy microbiome to baby because that microbiome is passed coming through the vaginal canal, and that bacteria will actually spread all over baby and through mouth all the way to anus. So it'll proliferate. Bacteria will start to grow within the first about 45 minutes of life. And then that microbiome is solidified through breastfeeding. You guys are amazingly and beautifully designed. You have glands in your areolas that takes a little bit of baby saliva into your body and provides biometric feedback, and your body starts to create the exact nutritional microbial cocktail for that infant at that moment, at that time, to get the best expression of health.
So babies born with cesarean are likely to be less healthy.
Have a much higher incidences of chronic disease. Yes, because we don't get the transference of the microbiome. But some very forward-thinking obstetricians, and now if a birth does result in a cesarean, they'll take a vaginal swab and they'll take that and rub it all over baby's mouth and face, and that'll help to create part of that transference. But then if we don't get that transference and we aren't breastfed, then the bacterial exposure that we get is from our environment. And most babies born cesarean are born where?
No.
What kind of bacteria likes to live in hospitals? Yep. You have a 20 to 30% increase in getting an infection that you didn't go into the hospital with if you do enter a hospital. Nosocomial infections. Okay. So, and the bacteria that like to live in hospitals are typically the really, really bad ones, which is why we have to blast them with antibiotics. But antibiotic-resistant infections are going way, way, way up. So again, microbiome depletion is happening to all of us at various scale. It's just we're using the baby as the example. However, if I use myself as an example, if I made the choice to drink a bottle of bourbon every night, eat a whole carrot cake, and what would my microbiome look like? It was not the ones you want, right? Like in a nutshell, we all know what this is. Okay, so but if we do start to distort the microbiome, which is happening at very, very early ages because of various chemical influences into and on the child, and it's going to start to mess stuff up, right? Cesarean's a big dog. Antibiotics, are antibiotics bacterial strain specific, or are they broad spectrum?
That's wrong.
One of my big bugaboos. How many times have you guys gone into the doctor's office and they're like, hey, you have an infection, here's some antibiotics. It's like, well, is it parasitic? Is it bacterial? Is it viral? And what are you treating it for? Has anybody ever asked that question?
I have, and they said we are also going to try something for right? Something that may.
Yeah. However, testing is starting to change, right? If you have an immediate life-threatening event, that's a good way to go about it. But if you got a common cold or something, like check the flow of antibiotics because it's going to mess up your microbiome, which is the foundation for how your immune system reacts with the world anyways. Inability to breastfeed, because we just talked about that transference. Breast milk is filled with something called immunoglobulin factors, IG factors, and they are the precursor, basically the stem cells to our immune system. So we need that breast milk to go in that baby. And then one that we address specifically is called a hypersympathetic response. Does anybody know what that means? Does anybody know what sympathetic means? Fight or flight response. Familiar with that term? Cool. Is birth a day at the beach or a little challenge? A little challenging, right? It's an amazing, beautiful, empowering. It can be a very beautiful, empowering experience, but it applies some stress on the body, right? On mom's body, on baby's body. Contractions are roughly estimated at 30 pounds of pressure. So, Susie, if I stood behind you and rhythmically put 30 pounds of pressure on top of your head and neck for the next 12 hours, you wouldn't be super happy with me, right? Have a tension type headache, might have some cervical sprain strain injuries. But basically why I communicate that is because birth is a somewhat stressful event. It depends on what research study you reference, which we'll talk about here in a minute. 80 to 90% of all newborns have a neuromechanical issue in the upper neck. It's just non-life threatening, so it doesn't get addressed in a emergent care situation. But where is the most range of motion in the body? What's the first thing the baby learns to control? Head position. What's the first thing somebody tells you when they hand you a baby? Support the. That's kind of important. But 80 to 90% of all newborns have a problem right here. And what lives inside here? What lives inside the neck up here? Inside the bones?
The bones.
Brainstem, right? And the brainstem is responsible for regulating all vital functions. So basically, that hypersympathetic response, if this part of you is distorted, it's going to jack up that stress response. It's going to put abnormal weight or tension on tissue, which is going to mess up that neural response or that communication pathway. It's going to cause crappy input, which is going to cause disorganization and crappy output. Turns called
Because coming through the birth canal.
yeah, just normal birthing mechanics and just bugger some stuff up. So
How about the acetaminophen?
acetaminophen, yeah. What is the most common severe side effect of overutilization of acetaminophen? And GI bleeds. So it's actually very well researched. Your digestive system bleeds when you take too much acetaminophen, which means what's the function of the digestive system? What's its job? What's it do for you?
It's a tract nutrition
Love it. Yeah, absorption and
and elimination.
elimination. Very good. So, do we want the digestive system to absorb everything or only certain things? Certain things. So, in the lining of the stomach and the small intestines, there's something called tight junctions and gap junctions. Basically, it's everybody played Red Rover growing up, where like you link arms with somebody and you want your stomach to be the kids that nobody could break the chain unless they wanted you to, right? You want your stomach to be selectively permeable. I want to keep certain things in and keep certain stuff out, like pathogens and parasites. However, when we start to break down the microbiome and we start to break down these junctions, then space gets created and it's open season and all sorts of fun stuff gets into the bloodstream. So that's why acetaminophen, which breaks down the gut lining, our gut is no longer selectively permeable. And then we have half digested food and parasites and bacteria and other crap floating around our bloodstream. And then what's your very intelligent body do with that? What's your immune system going to do?
Fight it.
It's going to start to fight it. And so now our immune system is tackling stuff inside of us, which is called or termed an autoimmune disorder. But it gets called different things depending upon what tissue it attacks, right? Hashimoto's, MS, neuroencephalitis, right? So we have all these different inflammatory conditions as a response to the breakdown of the microbiome and gut issues, which then precedes just chronic inflammatory load, because the immune system is going to be trying to fight the best fight it can, and it does that through producing inflammatory responses. And if that continues to occur for a long time, we have this amazing thing called blood-brain barrier. However, there's certain chemicals floating around in the world that make our blood-brain barrier much more permeable or subjective to allowing stuff into the brain. There's a whole barrier built around the brain that actually filters your internal blood before it touches the brain. Okay, so it's a super important protective mechanism. But eventually that can break down too, and then we get neural inflammation, and then we start to get diagnosed with all sorts of interesting conditions from there, mostly under the umbrella of neurodevelopmental conditions. You guys follow this pretty well?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and again, this is happening at scale to all of us based on the lifestyle that we're living. Good. Cool.
Thank you.
All right. So now that we all understand the statistics, which are not super encouraging, and we understand the process of why this is occurring, let's talk about how to start fixing it. Okay. So guys, where does health come from?
Within.
Good answer. The best answer I could ask for it. Did you study before? I'll get you a sticker.
Thank you.
A sticker. Yeah. Gold star, right? Okay. Yeah. So health is your birthright, right? Like most of us are designed to do a really good job thriving in our environment. Most living organisms want to live, and they do it in the best way that they can. So we take sperm and egg, we form a cell, turns to 2, 4, 8, magnifies or multiplies, and then in 9 months we have a somewhat fully formed human. But they're not ready to grab the car keys and run out the door yet. They still have to go through a very specific process of something called neurodevelopment. But you have this amazing thing called a central nervous system. It's made up of the brain, spinal cord, and nerve roots, and it controls and coordinates every function of the body. And the brain is processing approximately 11 trillion bits of data every second of every day, which is like baffling to think about, right? And all that information has to travel through the upper cervical spine, because information travels through the body based upon sensory input. Now, a lot of people get a lot of sensory input through their eyeballs, right? However, there's a certain type of sensory input that is of the highest quantity and never shuts off. You know what it's called? Proprio and mechanoreception, okay? Your proprioceptors and mechanoreceptors are constantly giving feedback to the brain about where your body is in space, how things are moving. Joint position and movement stimulates mechano and proprioception. And it's the highest quantity of data given to the brain. So if you start to distort this information, it starts to really impact how the brain performs, its understanding of the world, its understanding of the body, and the response that it drives. Have you ever start to fall asleep and then in your dream, something happened and your body physically moved before you became conscious again? That's your proprioceptive system in action. So it really never shuts off, okay? Because you move around when you sleep. And so your subconscious is still getting fed with proprioceptive stimuli. And so proprioception is truly what guides the process of neurodevelopment, because babies have to learn to control their head, control their extremities, control their trunk, start the process of getting up into a weight-bearing position, then moving as a quadruped, then moving as a biped, and then their brain is organized enough to form speech. So what happens if we put a whole lot of crappy information from our proprioceptive system into the brain as it's going through growth and development?
It
goes offline.
It goes off, it gets disorganized. It gets less efficient. Okay? Which is why a lot of people, when they're in the neurodevelopmental pyramid, have a really hard time filtering data, which is why then they get up and I have 4 kids, can you tell? Guys, time to eat. Right? They're all wiggling, right? Because they're trying to flood their brain with data to help them to regulate and respond and coordinate action in the environment. So if data is true, 80 to 90% of all newborns have a mechanical issue between the head and the neck. And this is where the most amount of range of motion is located in the body. So it is also where the most dense collection of mechano and proprioceptors live. And so if this little blown fuse up here doesn't get changed or corrected, then we're getting altered input. Okay? Now, luckily, there's multiple pathways to the brain, so there's the checks and balances, but eventually over time, crappy input's going to cause disorganization, crappy output. And that's exactly what this says. Big fancy term, disafferentation. Afferent means to the brain. Okay? I'm receiving afferent input based upon joint position and movement. That's going to drive a ton of input to my brain, specifically through my hypothalamus, which is what's called grand central station. All data of every kind has to pass through hypothalamus before it goes to the cortex, higher cortical learning centers, and then the response is then driven back in response. Right? So if you get a bunch of crappy input, you're going to cause crappy neurologic changes. But the cool part is, you drive better input, you get better neurologic changes. And that is called neuroplasticity, which is a really cool and hopeful term, because it means back in the day, we thought if the brain was damaged, it's damaged. Yes and no, it's not necessarily true anymore, because it can route new pathways, it can build new synapses, it can reprogram itself with the right cues, the right environment, and the right motor-based input going into the system. So the whole nervous system runs basically reflexive. You're not in conscious control of it, it's happening all the time. Specific reflexes called primitive reflexes. Are you guys familiar with the term primitive reflexes? Yeah. Cool. They are the playbook on how the brain is meant to develop. Okay. So like, for example, there's a palmar grasp reflex. You put your finger in a baby's hand and 10 times out of 10, they'll do this, right? They do love you, but this is a reflex. Okay. It will happen every time you do it. But this reflex should start to integrate or go away between 3 and 6 months of age. Because if the baby's job is to now start the process of weight bearing, if every time something touched the palmar surface of my hand, my fist closes up, how am I going to hold myself up and resist gravity? Not going to happen, right? There's a plantar grasp reflex, there's a Babinski reflex, there's a spinal Perez reflex, there's a Gallant reflex, there's an STNR reflex, there's an ATNR reflex, there's a rooting reflex, there's a Morrill-Starber reflex, there's all these cool reflexes that God gives babies as soon as they come through the birth canal. And then these reflexes organize life. These reflexes have to go away at specific milestones, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months in order for the brain to organize itself and grow and develop. Yes?
What happens if you don't have
Say that again.
What happened when you go to shut?
They are retained, and part of your neurology is stuck at 3 months of development, or 6 months of development, or 9 months of development. Crazy part. Recently, they started to change the goalposts for neurodevelopment because less than 50% of children are needing them at this time. So rather than trying to figure out, why, it's like, well, now from a population study standpoint, it is common. It's common for more than 50% of children, rather than walking at 12 months, they're doing it at 14 months. So now our new normal is 14. They also just took crawling out of normal pediatric neurodevelopment. So if your child never crawls, it's neurotypical, which crawling is literally the most, if not the most, one of the most important neuromechanical processes to get the brain to do its job. Okay. Crawling, which is a complex process because when you're really, really little, below 3 months of age, you turn the infant's head to the right, they will extend one arm and extend one leg on the same side of the body. It's a homologous movement. Okay. Does anybody run like this? No. Maybe Phoebe and friends through Central Park, right? My wife would appreciate that. No. So this is a homologous movement. Okay. This is a heterologous movement. It's a problem. It is a big problem.
Because when I was kid, she went from sitting to walk.
Yep. We need to make them relearn. Because if they don't crawl,
Well, she's 20 now, so it's fine.
like crawl tag, right? But if they don't go through that process, then they'll have less attachments. There's something called the corpus callosum, which is the piece of neural tissue that connects your left and your right hemisphere and your left and your right cerebellum and gets it to talk to each other. Okay, so if you don't go through this process, you're going to have some difficulties with regulation of mood, behavior, mathematics, language processing. So one of like the coolest things that you can do with a neuroatypical kid, like crawl tag.
So you don't need to make her crawl now?
Or she's acting a fool. She'd be like, hey, hands and knees, go clean the floors. Just put some scrubbers on there and get the floors done. Okay? So these primitive reflexes truly are the roadmap of the way that the brain is designed to grow and develop, and less than 50% of kids are following it. Guess who are the primary physicians who study primitive reflex integration and work on it with kids? PTs, OTs, guides. Or they weren't there originally at birth, which is also a problem. Either due to a traumatic response or something else.
Routine.
Yep. So they should all be there, but sometimes they're missing. So sometimes we have to get them to show up, and then we have to guide them to go away. Okay. This is why we love our OTs. We love our PTs, low fox therapy, motion 360. Like there's beautiful people out there that are really working through, and it takes a long time to do it sometimes, but these different movement patterns to organize this input into the brain, because it helps them get past that stuck developmental state. Okay. Then your whole nervous system again is automatic. It's not really, within your conscious control. What I want you guys to pay attention to in this slide is bundles of neural tissue. Where are they located? So since most of these children are stuck in chronic fight or flight from birth because they're not adapting to their environment world, so all environmental cues are like, am I okay? Am I safe? Right? Being in a high sympathetic state is going to elevate blood pressure, respiration. When your body's in a fight or flight mechanism, your body literally starts to shunt blood, moves blood away from the reproductive system and the digestive system and gets it to the heart, the lungs, and the extremities so we can fight or flight. Have you ever picked up a child who might be struggling and they're like a Hulk baby? They're like the strongest baby ever. They're like, their arms are rigid, their legs are rigid, arch their head, they throw their head back. They have just severe neurologic tension. Their system's already in a chronic fight or flight mechanism, and the brain's prioritizing development of the extremities versus internal systems. So most of that tissue is located along the thoracic spine. However, really cool bundles of neural tissue in the neck and pelvis, if we stimulate those, it drives what's called parasympathetic pathways, which is more of your resting, digesting, healing, reproducing, relaxed nervous system. And so most of the time when we're working with infants or neurodevelopmental struggles, we're really like we don't do a whole lot here. We're putting a whole lot of input through here and here in order to down-regulate that stress response so that way the body can start to focus on growth and repair. Sure.
So where are the lines going to? Are they going to the spine or are they going to like parts in the body?
Yeah, spinal cord, just bundles of sympathetic plexi, which is a bundle of neural tissue. They all go to various organs.
Both are. It shows to both where. So that's fine.
Yeah, so like your T3 through T4, that nerve root goes to the heart, but also the brainstem and the vagus nerve that controls blood pressure and heart as well. So again, there's multiple pathways to different organ systems. It's just whether you want to speed them up or slow them down. And it's very generic, but that's a good way to think about it. Right? And so since most newborns have a problem up here, their parasympathetic plexi are already a little off. So signs that we have non-autonomic balance, and this will mirror the neurodevelopmental population pretty closely. If we have what's called low parasympathetic tone, meaning our system is in a depressed state. Don't think like mentally, emotionally depressed. Like your system is not generating enough energy to work, and your cells are depressed, basically. Mentally, emotionally, we will experience things like depression, mood issues, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, hormonal issues, adrenal fatigue, compromised immune system, memory loss, brain fog, autoimmune profiles. However, if we're super ramped up and high sympathetic or chronic stress, well, you guys know this, we all live in chronic stress all the time. How do you feel when you're super stressed out? What happens to your blood pressure? Goes up, right? Respiration rate goes up. Does your immune system work better or worse over a long period of time? Worse. If I put you in a burning building, would you want to spend the time making a baby? It's like, no last shot. It's like, no, you don't have time for that. Right? Do you want to sit down and have a nice meal? Maybe pull up your phone, play a game, sit on the toilet, have a nice bowel movement? No, none of these things are a priority for your body in a high fight or flight mechanism. Which is why a lot of these children, a lot of these people have poor bowel function, hormonal function, or immune competence, or sleep patterns, or mood and regulation. Does this make sense?
Yeah. What if I have both of those?
Well, we actually can measure it for you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then we have to figure out is it neurologic or metabolic, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
But criminal castle.
Cool cases from the office. I just saw patient C the other day, super sweet kid, 6-year-old, completely nonverbal. After about 8 weeks of care, just comes in one day and just rattles off the alphabet. But that's cool. My wife's mom on the way, and she's like, "Oh, cool, yeah, let's keep it going, right?" Because we don't heal you. Your body heals you. We just have to put it in the right environment and give it the right cues, so that way we can change genetic expression. Okay? With a lot of upper cervical issues, it'll present with colic, torticollis, difficulty latching and breastfeeding because then baby doesn't have full control or isn't comfortable in full range of motion. If we're cross feeding versus football feeding, like we have to change our feed positions in order to deal with the torticolic presentation. That typically evolves into like chronic and recurrent ear infections, which then gets treated, not recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and then that distorts the microbiome, and then we propagate more illness, sickness, and stress, and then we start to show behavior, focus, and attention issues. So it's cool that we're able to knock out headaches for people like this at a very, very, very early age. So guys, this is what's called the neurodevelopmental pyramid. This is how the brain develops and organizes information. Okay, so I just want you to take away that at the foundation of this pyramid, in order to get to higher cortical learning centers like motor planning, reflex maturity, hand-eye coordination, because how many of these little people can't stand on 2 feet, behavior and academic learning, you have to have this going into the system, and it has to be of high quality. Right? Mechano and proprioceptive stimuli.
Oh, can you go back?
No, absolutely not. Yes, of course.
I'm a kindergarten teacher, so this.
Love it. I love all the like math and movement stuff. Stop it.
Good one.
Again, so this is from Dr. Robert Malila, who is considered an expert in this field. This is all in reference to primitive reflex integration. So primitive reflexes and their relationship to delayed cortical maturation. Basically meaning brain's not doing its job. Okay? Normally after first few months of life, the feedback mechanisms created by these primitive reflexes basically stimulate the palmar grass, stimulate the palmar grass, stimulate the palmar grass. This is going to wire things together, nerves that fire together, wire together, and then eventually this reflex will start to integrate or go away. The brain will develop past that point. leads ultimately to the inhibition of these reflexes. Again, the more stimuli going in, the faster the reflexes mature, which allows us to activate more complex postural reflexes like sitting up, crawling, and standing, resulting in a more complex interaction with the environment. We're a bipedal organism, not a quadruped, so we're designed to stand on two legs, not four legs. This turns or leads into greater sensory feedback, thereby activating genes, epigenetic expression, that allow for the creation and integration of more cortical networks. So it's just a feedback loop. Like, the more good input we get, the more efficient the system gets. The more input we get, the more efficient the system gets. And the really cool part about having all this understanding of neurologic development, it is the exact opposite in neurologic decay. What does a developing brain need, and what does a decaying brain need? The exact same thing. Okay, so that's why we also love caring for our adults and golden athletes, because the more input we drive to that system, the better the system continues to fire. So where's the disconnect, guys? This is a missing piece of the puzzle for many of these cases, because not many people, not many of these neurosensory children have access to really high quality chiropractic care. Okay? What we look at in this office is something called a vertebral subluxation complex. Big fancy term. Think about like a blown fuse. Okay, joints are out of position. It's not moving the right way. The surrounding receptors are not getting stimulated effectively, and it's driving crappy or bad communication to the brain. There are 7 cervical vertebrae, 12 thoracic, and 5 lumbar. And then your sacrum, when you're a kid, is built into 4 separate pieces. As an adult, it's 1 piece. Some kids have more bones than adults do, so they have more receptor activity. More things are firing because more things move. Right? So each of those vertebrae are like a relay. Right? Anybody ever played the game telephone growing up? Where like 30 kids sit in a circle, and the first kid tells one kid something, and by the time it gets around to the 30th kid, the message is like, that is way off base, brother. Like, yeah. It's a really good analogy to how your system works. All these guys are relays going up the system, and if we have distortion upon each relay, then by the time information gets to the brain, it's kind of crappy communication. And the brain's like, okay, I'll do the best I can with that command, and let's see what we get. So think of it like a blown fuse, but really it's just a spinal alignment, which causes or alters neurophysiology. This will create autonomic imbalance because there's a vertebral artery that runs through the neck that supplies the majority of the blood to the hindbrain, primitive brain, the temporal lobe, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. It really starts to mess with some stuff. We have really cool cases where we've been able to help people help their bodies to resolve things like seizures and epilepsy, because most of those seizures are occurring in the temporal and occipital lobes, and most seizure activity is hypoxia, lack of oxygenation to the tissue. So if we can increase blood flow and oxygenation to the vertebral artery, which you can by influencing the structure of the neck, then you can make some cool impacts on people. You guys want to poke around, and may or may not be somebody employed here with the process. So increased inflammatory load, because if we're in that high fight or flight mechanism, because the brain's getting all sorts of crappy information, if you're super stressed, your body's going to produce more chronic inflammatory load, which is going to precede a disease process. Mechanical issues in the spinal column alter cerebrospinal fluid circulation. How does back up. What is the purpose of cerebrospinal fluid? What's its function? Why did God give it to you? We all have little people for the most part, right? Are they little trouble monsters? Yep. Sister took a baseball bat and backed the knees one time, right? You grow up with cousins and you play football in the backyard, and somebody throws their head through a fence. It's like, why did their brain not explode inside their skull? It's like there's this cool buoyant viscous fluid that protects and insulates the nervous system. It's called cerebrospinal fluid. So it's there for protection, but it's also there to nourish neural tissue and help remove waste. You know this, but you don't know it. What organ in your body uses the most amount of energy throughout the day? So therefore, as a byproduct of chemistry, what produces the most amount of waste? How do you flush crap out of your brain? Circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. How does cerebrospinal fluid circulate? We'll be a little dramatic. Pick that up, yeah. But when you breathe, your abdomen should go out, your diaphragm should come down, your occiput on your atlas will tilt a little bit, your pelvis will tilt a little bit, so it'll look like people breathe roughly 12 times a minute. So your occiput, your sacrum act like mechanical well handles, and they help pump and circulate fluid, as well as the cardiovascular system helps with that as well. So if you have really crappy spinal mechanics in the upper neck or in the pelvis, because how many of us sit for 8 to 12 hours a day, which means our butts don't move, we're meant to be in a squatting upright position, which is the exact mechanical lever mechanism that helps to pump fluid. Then we have alterations of cerebrospinal fluid. We get a buildup of metabolites and other crap in the brain, and these little people don't need any more information. And then mechanical spinal cord tension. There's a really cool textbook written in the 80s that's currently influencing orthopedic surgery. It's called, it's by Dr. Alf Gregg, and it's called Neuromechanics. So your nervous system is surrounded by this sheath called the meninges. Has anybody ever heard of this before? It's meningitis, or have you ever heard of an epidural? Right? The dura mater is the outer lining of that sheath. So we have to pierce the sheath to inject medication directly into the spinal cord to shut off the spinal fluid, which controls pain and temperature. So the meninges are connective tissue, and they anchor the spinal cord inside the bony column through something called dentate ligaments. So your spinal cord is not just like wiggling around like a noodle inside your spine. It's held in place. Think of a telephone pole with wires on the ground. So what we're seeing in literature is that your sagittal balance, basically where your ear is in reference to your butt, if this goes forward, or we start to see changes in curvature of the column, we start to see mechanical distortions in spinal structure, it puts abnormal tension on the meninges. And that puts abnormal tension on neural tissue. And like the guitar we talked about earlier, now it doesn't resonate the way that it's supposed to. So here's the playbook, guys. This is a way that you could potentially think about approaching improving the neurodevelopmental profile, but ultimately just health. Okay? Number one resource that you have is time. Healing is not an event, but a process. So let's say somebody comes into the office and yesterday they picked up a piece of paper off the floor and blew their back out and caused a herniated disc injury. Was that mechanism of movement and that load enough to cause failure of that tissue? No. So was picking up the paper the problem, or the 4 decades of damage done prior to that moment in time the problem? Okay, so most of us have these underlying things cooking for a while before it shows up. So healing is a process, not a one-off event. It takes time to get the body to repair. Anybody ever go to the gym once, run home, look in the mirror, and be like, "Yeah, I did it." Nah, right? That'd be sweet. We'd like work out like once a year, it'd be great. But no, okay. It takes investment, it takes time, it takes repetition to truly organize and drive health. So time is the most important factor in this, because some cases heal in weeks, some in years. Just every case is a little bit different based on their own genetic profile, genetic expressions, environmental factors, toxic loads, nutrition, neurology, like what happened. And if you really expand that view, because there's some really cool literature now on transgenerational stress patterns, meaning they took this mom, this has been studied with famine, this has been studied with the Holocaust, this has been studied with slavery, this has been studied in all sorts of traumatic experiences. But a good analogy or good study was they took a mama mouse and they shocked her, they electrocuted her every time she drank water, and they mapped the stress response, like how the brain did up. And then they bred her. And her offspring, when they would interact or when they'd go drink water, their brain would light up with the same stress pattern. How many generations down the line do you think that was present for? 14. 14 generations, the same stress pattern, even though there wasn't an electrical stimuli, was still mapped or retained in their offspring in response to interacting with water. So, like we're talking about just you and what your parents did. We're not talking about what happened prior to that point in time, right? But that does play a role. And again, this has been very well established when you look at the literature on there was a famine in, it was either Denmark or Sweden. And basically they followed the lineage of the people that were calorically restricted and people that were like the 1%ers that just, had everything. And so 3 generations down the line, they found that individuals that were, gluttonous during that famine period, their children had much higher incidences of type 2 diabetes, whereas the individuals that were more in a caloric restrictive state their children had less chronic diseases. So I was like, kind of cool, right? So grandpa and grandma did and all that stuff, yeah, plays a role, but it's not so much the genetics as it is the environment influencing what the genetics is doing. Okay. So time's number one resource, and everything in the body runs on information and power. Okay, so if we can start to derive better input into your neurology, which you can do through mobility, chiropractic care, exercise, movement. However, we have a lot of people that exercise at crap time and still need to get adjusted. So, this is there's a lot of different pieces to this, but if we can organize better information to the nervous system, we can help the body to adapt to the environment more effectively. And then if we can start to put the right foods into the system, then we can downregulate that chronic inflammatory response and start to heal that leaky gut syndrome and improve the expression of the microbiome, which then is going to influence psychoneuroimmune modulation and serotonin production, upregulation, all sorts of other cool things that will benefit you and benefit your family. Once those two things work really well, because now we're not chronically stressed and inflamed, and then we're not chronically stressed and inflamed chemically, then we can actually absorb. We can get the stuff out of the stuff that we need in order to get our body to work the way it's supposed to. But then our amazing body, which is designed to heal itself, will start to do just that. And then we can start to work on, like, once the body's in a competent state, then we can start to flush more crap out of the system because it can handle the load. Sometimes we organize the healing pathway potentially in not the most beneficial manner. Because some people that are super sick, they want to go straight to detox. And sometimes that's a great solution, and sometimes it's too much load for their body to process. They're already in an inflamed and sick state. That means the system already isn't doing a good job identifying. So why would we flood the blood with more crap, right? So usually there's an order of operations that if we follow, and the really cool part about once people start pursuing chiropractic care is typically their other health professionals start to say, like, hey, your child is advancing faster through OT. It's like, yeah, well, their nervous system's getting better information so they can coordinate and adapt and organize the movements more effectively. Right? It's the foundational layer of information that the brain needs. Back in the day, people were like, there's no research on chiropractic. It's like, that's just not true anymore. They're the crap out of data. So one of the coolest researchers in the world is named Heidi Havoc. She's a power woman out of New Zealand. She's awesome. She talks like a sailor, but she's got a great New Zealander accent, so she's really fun to listen to. But she's publishing all sorts of cool data on brain function and how it directly correlates to alterations in health of your spinal. So spinal dysfunction alters input to the brain, altered input to the brain, causes chronic changes. Chronic changes leads to bad information, bad control over the system. Okay. Subluxation, fight or flight. When the body is subluxated or when joints are out of position, it drives more of a stress response because the brain's more disorganized. When we adjust, we can measure and see a true parasympathetic activation or the nervous system downregulating. There's a really cool study evaluating salivary amylase and cortisol levels post-adjustment. Within 20 minutes post-adjustment, cortisol levels downregulate in the bloodstream. It's measurable. And your salivary amylase, which is an enzyme your body produces to upregulate sugar to your brain so you can get more energy faster, also downregulates. Subluxation autonomic balance. We actually measure this stuff here at the office, but heart rate variability is a gold standard way for us to assess the depth and the adaptation and performance of your nervous system. So there's a really cool machine that we use here to evaluate your HRV, but people under chiropractic care typically have much higher heart rate variability analysis. Subluxation neuroplasticity, vertebral subluxation, or alterations in the structure of the body, alter the central nervous system. Autonomic balance in chiropractic care. Alterations in temperature, heat, and inflammation from left to right of the column is a great way for us to assess the performance and the capacity of the nervous system. Guess what we do here? We measure this stuff, okay? All right. So brain changes. The adjustment shows about a 20 to 30% increase in prefrontal cortex activation. Prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that you use for what? Logic, reason, executive function, control of emotions, behavior, social engagement, intimacy, right? Men's prefrontal cortex don't develop until the age of 25, 26. Women,
18, 19.
18, 19, 20. That's why girls are like, grow up. We're like, we're trying. We're just not there yet. Okay, give me a break. But then we look at like the school structure. It's like, okay, girls have a little bit more advanced neurology from a prefrontal cortex standpoint than boys do. And we make them adhere to the same structure and standards of sit still, listen, and behave. I can't sit still because movement is what feeds my brain. Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense sometimes, right? But the adjustment does drive input to the prefrontal cortex, and it's measurable to see glucose metabolism changes, meaning the brain is using less energy to do the same job. Lower stress levels, improve quality of life, decrease muscle tone, decrease salivary noise. Okay? How do you have it again? Increased activation of the prefrontal cortex by 20%. Dee Harrison is also one of the other leading authorities in the world on spinal correction, and his data is super cool. They did a study on asymptomatic collegiate athletes, so college kids that have no issues, and they broke them into two groups. One group, they had cervical curves because the curvature of your neck is really, really important. It's called the arc of life in anatomy. Should be around 42 degrees in roughly 2/3 of the population. But if your curvature falls below 20 degrees, it starts to cause problems. So they basically took collegiate athletes and put them in groups of curvatures of less than 20 degrees, curvatures of greater than 20 degrees. And they did all these cool athletic tests: 40s, verse, hand-eye, balance, repositioning, squat, everything. And literally every single participant with a curvature of less than 20 degrees was worse in performance than curvatures of greater than 42 degrees. So even if you don't have symptoms, but you're like, hey, I want to perform better, I need to get a 10% increase in my athletic performance, you need to understand the shape of your cervical curves.
Can you alter that?
That is what our office specializes in. One of three in the state that does it. Okay? It's called chiropracticbiophysics. It is the most well-researched and the only technique that I'm aware of that causes reproducible structural corrective changes, and we can show you cool pre and post x-rays in about 90 days. Okay. Cool testimony from the office. Sissy, that's her. She's doing well. Down syndrome. Difficulty with learning to read, difficulty with food, sleep patterns, difficulty with bowel function. Her mom, Deb, used to bring her into the office. RIP, she's a lovely human. But when she started pursuing care, her need for laxatives went away. Her digestive system started to regulate itself. Let's see here. She also started to communicate more effectively, and she started to express the desire to read. Very cool. All right. So what causes subluxation? Everything. But really, birth is the primary or the first stressor applied to the body. So again, depends upon what research study you reference, whether it's by Dr. Gutman, medical doctor. 80% of newborns were found to have vertebral misalignment or funky stuff in the upper neck, messing with brain performance, blood flow, and cerebrospinal fluid circulation. At 1,250 infants evaluated by Dr. Gil Freiman, who's an osteopath, 90% suffered birth trauma or a sprain strain injury to the neck and cranium, 10% had severe trauma. Abraham Tobin, medical doctor, published back in the 1960s. This stuff's been around for a long time, guys. Dr. Biederman, medical doctor. We call it subluxation. He calls it KISS syndrome, but basically jacks up the central nervous system. Proprioceptive signals originate from the craniocervical junction, where your head meets your neck. Any obstacles impeding these afferent signals will have many more extensive consequences in the developing nervous system, which depends more upon appropriate stimuli to organize itself. Things that increase the likelihood of having issues up here: long labor, C-sections, vacuum extraction, finished triplets, and abnormal presentations upon delivery. Did you guys know that when you're under chiropractic care for the duration of their pregnancy, baby's in optimal position for birth in 89% of cases? Kind of cool, right? Because your uterus is connected by ligaments that connect to your pelvis and your abdominal wall. And if my pelvis is like this and my body's like this, then my uterus is going to have a lot of intrauterine constraint force and tension on it, just not enough room for baby to do its job. I think there's probably a lot more neuromechanical postural distortion going on than there is bodies growing babies too big for themselves. Side benefits, review the literature. So even if people were asymptomatic and they were just coming in to get adjusted, these are all the cool things they report improvement in. So the body just works better when the nervous system gets the right information. Patient J, severely autistic, originally came in 15 years of age, under care for 3 years. When she first came in, little verbal skills, would not engage with family or others, headphones down like this 90% of the time. Had interrupted periods of sleep and irregulated menstrual cycles. Was her body in a fight or flight mechanism? No social cues or reproductive health. Yep. Over the past 3 years, patient parents have reported improvements in sleep, appetite, digestion, posture, improved communication, balance, and regulated menstrual cycles. Her initial thermal assessment. White's relative normal, green's mild, blue's moderate, red is severe inflammatory load. Over time, that's what happened. Her system got better at communicating and adapting. And as a result, she performed better. So, guys, again, kind of starting at the top, the best thing that you can do is create an environment for your body to perform well. Okay? The two biggest systems that are going to influence that for you are going to be your nervous system and your digestive system. I just gave you the right person and a roadmap of how to care for your nervous system better. Also, please check out reflexes, symphony of reflexes, so that way you can have a nice playbook of understanding what reflex is there at what time and when it's supposed to go away. And if you need resources on like what activities do I need to do to help my kids with primitive reflexes, just ask. There's all these cool YouTube channels now. I actually just found one the other day. Shout out to Harka. I have no idea who these people are, but they're doing a really good job putting good content on YouTube on helping parents and helping children with primitive reflex integration. Okay. But if you need referrals for primitive reflex integration, let me know. We do it here, but also there's other people that do it really, really well. So if you need a good referral, please let me know. Next step, or simultaneously, if you can do them together, it's just hard to change a lot of things at one time, is to start to change what's going into our system. Little people get fed a whole lot of interesting stuff. And if you look at the food pyramid, we have some questions there. Because at the foundation of that is carbohydrates, and most of the research that I read shows that a ketogenic diet actually heals lesions of neural tissue, so a high protein diet with very minimal carbohydrate intake. Most of our children in this population have very altered microbiomes, and bacteria want to live. What's bacteria's primary food source? And so what do kids want? Pizza, chicken nuggets, macaroni and cheese. What is dairy broken down to in the body? Sugar and casein, which is a milk protein, is an opioid receptor. It binds to opioid receptors in the brain. It's super addictive. Same with gluten products. And that's why when your little people come back from lunch, they're very difficult to work with.
Oh, we got a reason.
Yep. Still, probably difficult to work with. And then they do like artificial dyes. Like finally, so they just changed something there, which is really, really cool. But they finally quantified the amount of artificial dye it takes to actually cause a neurologic disorganization and kill neural tissue. It's roughly measured at 30 mg. So I can't remember if it's micro or milligrams, but 30 mg. And they like an average kid's lunch, mac and cheese, pizza, a Mountain Dew, 1,500 milligrams of artificial dyes. It's like, good night, right? So if you guys need help in organizing nutrition for your child, and in full transparency, that's a struggle, especially with a neuro-different child. That is a fight, but it's a fight worth having. Okay, your child will not starve itself forever, maybe for a few days, but fasting is really good for resetting your microbiome.
Yeah.
So let them do it, and then set a wall, set the line. They will not starve themselves forever. It will be a fight. It will be very unfun for probably 2 to 6 weeks. But then as the microbiome starts to change and inflammation starts to calm down, you start to change things. Dr. Burns. So Dr. Paul Hardy, Dr. Burns out on the West Coast, they're both incredible doctors helping to reorganize the digestive system. If you guys need referrals here in the community, I can plug you into different people, or we have functional med and metabolic programs here in our office, usually more for adults than kids. So, but if you need help organizing the nutritional component of your protocol care, please just ask for Ashley. Okay. So, as always, our family looks forward to partnering with yours to get to the root cause of your health concerns. And thank you for your time and attention today. I hope this was a blessing to you. And if you know other people that like this was great, we need this, more people need to hear this stuff, let me know. I love going to businesses and moms groups and church groups and Girl Scout groups or whatever groups you guys got. And if you want to talk about stress or neurology or health or cardiovascular, whatever you're talking about, happy to hang out with you guys and present some wonderful information to help you guys to get unstuck and start to move the ball down the field. So thank you for your time and attention. We look forward to caring for you, your family, and your loved ones, and be blessed and have a good night.
Thank you. So to get this offer, just purchase online, right? You can do that.
Yeah, or you can talk to Claire.